Hello, my name's Josh. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I've recently been through a divorce. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about trying to find good counseling for your children. First, I need to talk about counseling to begin with. Early on in the divorce process, I realized a couple things. One, I was learning about the divorce process, and it was quite an education for me, and the emotions and everything involved with it were nothing I had experienced before. But I also knew that my children were going to be going through the exact same thing, but that their experience was going to be very different than my experience. And so whatever advice I may have may not be great advice for them. So, and then I had also seen people I knew people who years after, they were children when their parents got divorced, and they talk about all the things they struggled with. And from that, I would hear things I was like, oh, I would have never thought of that. I would have never thought about that because I didn't go through that as a child at all. So I don't understand it. So I decided that I needed to get my children into a counselor, into a therapist that could help, who was trained, that could help and guide them. So I am very fortunate in that I work for a company that provides good health insurance, and part of that coverage includes counseling and therapy. So, the first thing I did was I was already seeing a counselor. I asked the counselor, what things should I be looking for? Given this situation, what kind of counselors, what kind of things should I look for with a person who would be a counselor to my children? I also asked a couple other people in my area that I know who are therapists, who I trust their opinion, who are like members of my ward or stake. So I asked them a similar question. Given my situation, what did they think was best? And that situation includes the age of your children and things of that nature. So one thing that I learned was that children under 12 years old do very well in something called play therapy. I had no idea until I started talking to these counselors. So I went onto my insurance homepage and I looked for people that were covered under my insurance plan and found some in there that also specialized in play therapy. So I went and I got some advice and I learned what I should be looking for. The next thing I did was I actually interviewed counselors. So this was in COVID, and so it was a tough go. I knew my kids would need face-to-face interaction. I did not want, if I could avoid it, to have to do it over a screen. So I called around, and I called a lot of counseling places that were, on my insurance plan. Some of them, the therapists weren't accepting any new patients. They were booked up. Some of them were only doing virtual visits. And then there was a couple that I found that were doing in-person visits, and they had safety protocols and everything, but they were doing in-person visits. So I set appointments, and I had to pay for the appointments, but I set appointments and I interviewed the therapists because I wanted to have a good feel for who my children would be interacting with. Ultimately, in the end, I'm still their parent. I may not be trained on how to deal with everything that my children are going to be going through, but I'm their parent and I'm responsible. So I interviewed a couple, and I found one that I ended up really liking. And so that was kind of the next step in the process. One thing that therapist recommended that I actually thought was a great idea, and this is part of the reason that I ended up going with her, was she recommended at the very first session that the entire family come in. So at that point, my soon-to-be ex-wife, me, and all of our children come in together. She wasn't going to be seeing all of the children, but she wanted to see the family dynamic. And it was actually a very comfortable, very friendly environment. It was a really good visit, but it helped her understand how we interact with each other. She was able to ask us questions about the situation going on, see the way the kids responded to that, and then kind of glean information from that entire visit. The next thing that I did was really kind of simple, right? I stayed on top of it. Making sure that my kids were going when that counselor recommended it. That the counselor, still to this day, I have a couple children who are still in counseling, and my ex-wife and I have a regular conference call set with that counselor to discuss how is this child doing, and how is there anything we need to be doing differently in the way we're interacting with our child to help them get through the struggles of this divorce. One thing that should be noted with the counselor, and my counselor made this very clear, is that information that is shared between my child and that counselor, the counselor will not convey any of that information to me or my ex-wife without the permission of my daughter first, or daughters. And basically, they would give permission first. So confidentiality is kept in these situations, which was a great thing. Because what I discovered is, as much as I try to talk to my children and tell them that they could come to me and ask me questions and talk to me, and it was difficult for them because there was just some topics they just weren't comfortable asking about. Sometimes they'd be frustrated because they'd ask me a question and I would just say, I really can't tell you that. Like, there's an answer to this question, but it's really not appropriate for me to tell you that right now. Maybe when you're an adult someday, but right now it's not appropriate for me to answer that for you. And sometimes, the kids get frustrated because they want answers and they're not getting it. So it was good because then they can go to the counselor. They could talk to the counselor about that. And then they could get an explanation from another adult outside of the situation who was able to express the same thing, but maybe in a different way, which helped my child or children understand it a little bit better. But the other thing that was really helpful with counseling was to see my children progress and process things. Because, although the counselor wouldn't share anything with me, I'd ask my kids afterwards. I'd say, how'd counseling go? And really good. And I said, well, is there anything you want to talk to me about? And sometimes they'd say, well, yeah, this, and this. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it would lead to us having a really good conversation. But I think them figuring out what they were really feeling and being able to work with the counselor on that made it so that then they were comfortable coming to me, and I'm assuming my ex-wife also, to discuss some of the concerns they had, some of the feelings they were having. So when it comes to helping our children through this divorce process, there's a lot of things we can do. I mean, I've read books and I've tried to be patient and kind with my children. I've tried to set healthy expectations with them. But ultimately, I've never been through it. I'm not trained. And although I could have a gut feel because I am their parent, the best thing for my children was to be in counseling. And they'll be, I've told them, as long as they need to be. I've had a couple of children who are no longer going to counseling, but I've told them, they feel that the counselor in them felt that they were good. But they know that if they ever feel like they need to go back, they always can go back. And they need to have ultimately a safe space where they can talk about, frankly, if they need to talk about something that I'm doing that's making them mad or upset, that they can talk about it. Or same thing with my ex-wife, they can talk about it with the counselor and have it just be a safe space where they can try to work through those difficult emotions. Ultimately, I've only been divorced for a little over 6 months, so my kids have been going to counseling for about a year now. I've seen progress, definitely, and they're doing fairly well, but I've got a lot of years ahead of me, so I'm sure there's going to be some bumps in the road. But one piece of advice I always give people when they're going through divorce, if they have children, is find a way to get them into counseling. Even if they're little. If they're at a point where they can talk, at some point it may be healthy to get them into counseling and just see if there's a way. Because children, as resilient as children are, they also have a lot of emotions they don't know how to deal with because they haven't learned how to. And so it's a great place, it's a great thing for them to have somewhere to go to learn how to express those emotions and work through those emotions. Because if they don't do it when they're children, they'll be doing it when they're an adult. And the stakes are a lot higher at that point in time. So even though, I always end my videos by saying I'm a member of the church and this channel is my own, my thoughts are my own. And again, I am not a counselor here, but I fully endorse sending your children to a good counselor, one that you approve, that you interview, you feel good about. And to be clear, my ex-wife also felt good about this counselor. This was a joint decision to get them to counseling, and the selection of the counselor was a joint decision. So that way my kids knew that it was It was both of us wanting the best for our children. So, again, get your children in counseling. I highly recommend, if at all possible, make it happen. Thanks for coming back to my channel.